Hello and welcome to Reimagining Love. I'm Dr. Alexandra Solomon. Relationships have the power to wound us and the power to heal us. As a clinical psychologist, author, and professor at Northwestern University, I've devoted my life to studying intimate partnerships and family dynamics. On Reimagining Love, I'm here to translate complex clinical topics into tools and takeaways that you can use in your relationships today. If you're ready to develop relational self-awareness and create vibrant and loving relationships with the people who matter most to you, you've come to the right place. I'm so glad that you're here. Hi there, welcome back to Reimagining Love. Today, I'm excited to introduce you to my guest, Dr. Frank Anderson. Dr. Frank Anderson is a world-renowned trauma expert, Harvard-trained psychiatrist, and psychotherapist. His work sits at the intersection of internal family systems, IFS, and neuroscience. As a global speaker on the treatment of trauma and dissociation, he's passionate about teaching brain-based psychotherapy and integrating current neuroscience knowledge with IFS. Dr. Anderson is the co-founder of the Trauma Institute and Trauma Informed Media, organizations that promote trauma awareness, education, integration, and healing. He is a lead trainer at the IFS Institute under Dr. Richard Schwartz and has a long affiliation with the New York Times bestselling author of The Body Keeps the Score, Bessel van der Kolk. Dr. Anderson has also worked with professional dancer and influencer Juliana Hough to help her develop a trauma-informed dance component to her dance program. As a leading trauma expert, Dr. Anderson's last two books, Transcending Trauma and Internal Family Systems Skills Training Manual, were targeted towards therapists. Now, he's the author of an immensely vulnerable memoir, To Be Loved, a story of truth, trauma, and transformation. In To Be Loved, Frank takes us through his journey of growing up gay in a traditional Italian-American home that was fiercely loving and culturally close-knit, while at the same time unaccepting, abusive, and riddled with secret shame and dark family secrets. After enduring years of conversion therapy as a child in the 1970s, Frank became driven to create the perfect life, complete with a family, a successful career, and a white picketed house in the suburbs, until it all fell apart. His story is at once a family drama, a coming out tale, and a redemption story that Frank is opening up about to show that no matter what you've experienced, healing from trauma is possible. And to Frank, sharing your story is an essential part of that process. In our conversation, he weaves his clinical knowledge with his personal experiences to shine a light on both how to start the healing process and why we need to. In this discussion, Frank helps us hold two important truths: that healing is possible and that it's a journey that will continually show up in different parts of your life as you enter new relationships, become a parent, and more. Today, Frank also shares his perspective on estrangement by explaining how he knew estrangement was the right choice for him and his father, and then how he eventually decided to restart contact. And finally, we respond to a listener's question about a complicated relationship that replicates her difficult relationship with her mother. I found Dr. Frank to be equally joyful and wise. His story reminds us of the power of healing because trauma blocks our access to ourselves. And when we unburden ourselves from the past, we can stop replicating old stories and access our truest selves. I hope that you enjoy this conversation. Dr. Frank Anderson, finally, you and I get some time together. Hi.
Hello, it's so good to be here. I'm so excited about this conversation. Thank you so much for having me.
So wonderful. So I am excited to talk to you about trauma and healing and your magnificent new book. But I want to start by asking you the relational self-awareness question that I ask all of the Reimagining Love guests. Are you ready for it?
I am ready.
Okay. How are you reimagining love in one of your important relationships these days?
That's what I would say. How about that for a start?
Just
Like,
one big exhale.
here you go. Right. So, reimagining love. Wow. That's so powerful because I'm having discussions yesterday with David Kessler, who's a friend of mine out here in LA right now. And I am reimagining love with my husband of 25 years this coming May. Right. And so it's such a powerful, the big sigh was all about the way we got together 25 years ago in kind of the first non trauma driven relationship I ever experienced. So it was like I didn't even recognize this relational dynamic because it was not a repeat of anything I knew. We had a lovely 5 years together before we had kids. And now we have a 20-year-old and a 16-year-old. So the last 20 years have been all about kids, right? All about kids. Our whole focus has been about kids. And now, as they're 20 and 16, they're not needing us quite in the same way, right? So we're both in this place of reimagining our relationship. Like, and it really is something because who we were really worked. It really worked in a beautiful way. One of the most healing relationship I've ever been in. And this new territory of my kind of career skyrocketing right now, and him as the primary stay at home, taking care of kind of two special needs kids, how he's kind of reimagining himself as I'm becoming this thing I never knew was even possible. We are totally reimagining our relationship and reimagining love right now in a way that's exciting and a little scary. He said yesterday to me, he's like, I hope I like you. I hope I like who you're becoming. And I'm like, oh, damn. Oh, damn. So we're really in that reimagining phase right now.
Yeah. And that I can imagine that for him, there's so much pride, right? In watching, because he knew you, back
Yes,
when not everyone knew you and
that's
fewer
right.
people. And so he has that ability to feel proud of you while also perhaps reminding you a little bit of, your roots and who you've been and where, right? Is that sort of both of those of like keeping you grounded while helping you bloom?
Totally. Like one of the things about him that I love so much is he has never said no to anything I've wanted to do. Like talk about full support. Oh my goodness, I want to give back 1,000 times more because he's always supported me. He's always seen the potential, seen my vision, loved me in that give back better way. Like he's been so wonderful in that way. And not many people know me the way he does, right? So I wouldn't say he yanks me back to reality. Like I wouldn't kind of say that, but he does throw out these zingers that remind me about who I am, right? He's like, yeah, and blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, oh, yeah, that's right. It's a good balance in that way to stay true to me because, Alexandra, I don't know about you and your kind of career trajectory, but the more and more I do this, the more and more I'm aware it actually isn't even about me.
Mhm.
It's a much larger vision and purpose, right? So he does help ground me and remind me of that. Like, hey, Frank, this isn't about you. This is about
The
purpose.
work. Mhm.
Thank you.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
then I can get back to me. So it's been a helpful balance in that way for sure.
I'm imagining as somebody is listening to this bit of our conversation that there are lessons in there, even for couples where one isn't expanding in a public facing way, but where one is just growing in a healing way or deepening into purpose. And there's the healing that the individual is experiencing by growing, but then there's the healing by having their partner witness their growth, even as perhaps there might be a part of their partner that's like, oh, wait, am I going to like you as you heal? Are you going to like me as you heal? Are you going to feel like you're? So I think there's something really important there about how, like, for you, what you're modeling here is your own mindfulness that as you grow and shift and expand, something's being asked of your husband to track along with you. There's really important reminders in that.
100%. And you know, one of the things that I was aware of, and we're in this phase right now, like we met with a new couples therapist last week for the first time. We're like, time for couples, right? Because it was this, the writing this book, which I did not expect at all, was enormously healing for me in a way that I could have never anticipated. I've been in therapy for like 33 years, like a long time, right? I'm a therapy lifer. But this book brought a new dimension of healing for me around, and we'll talk about the F word, forgiveness, right? And loving someone who's harmed you. And what ended up happening is it got us a little bit out of balance because people grow at different rates, right? He was so steeped in with the kids, and I did this huge expansion over the last 3 years of writing this book. So we're readjusting right now. We're really readjusting. It's fascinating because I had this huge expansion that he supported. He's been holding down the fort and now is like, wait a minute, like the kids don't need me. My turn. Where's the room and space for me? Right. And so you're constantly navigating the contraction, expansion in the family, but also in the relationship.
And that is exactly a beautiful moment to bring in a couples therapist, because otherwise, if you don't, a ton of fear can creep in, a ton of resentment can creep in, a ton of misunderstanding can creep in. So you guys are saying to each other, okay, let's make sure that we have a space where we can really hear and witness each other.
Navigate this next phase because it is a next phase for our family and for, my husband and I together.
All right. To be loved. So your previous books, you have been, this is not your first rodeo, but you have written for a clinical audience. And those books of yours have been, there to teach the how of healing trauma. But now you've done something pretty different. You've written a memoir, and it's called To Be Loved, a story of truth, trauma, and transformation. And this book is the story of your life, talking about your early traumatic experiences, your work as an adult to process the patterns and the lessons from your early experiences. So tell us, what excited you as a trauma specialist? Like, what was the pull for you around switching from writing from a clinical perspective for a clinical audience to writing a memoir about trauma? What was that journey for you?
It was an interesting one because after I wrote Transcending Trauma, and that was, I spent a lot of time during the pandemic, like many of us did, like baking bread or, writing books, like whatever you ended up doing, right? And when that book came out, I was really surprised. I kind of had this, that's when my purpose got aligned. Like after that book, I was like, I went for a run and I was like, okay, world, this is yours. Like it's yours now. Here you go. And I got this clear message: you're here to bring trauma healing to the world. And I didn't know what that meant at the time. And I was kind of like, me? Like, why me? Like, hello? Like, it's just Frank, right? And so I didn't understand what that meant at the time. And then my life started evolving in this way. And my publisher is the one that really suggested, Frank, we think you should write a memoir. And again, I was like, why me? Like, hello, do you know who I am? Like, you know? And they said, you always talk about your trauma history. And we really believe that you're going to be able to help people in the general public heal by telling your story. Like, I was like, hi, I'm Frank. I'm gay and I have a trauma history. Nice to meet you. Like, that's the kind of person I am. And so when they said it, I was a little bit shocked. Like, oh, okay. And it really sparked this bringing trauma healing to the world. Cause I was like, wow, if I can tell my story, I could reach people in the general public, not just therapists are trying to learn about neuroscience or IFS or, complex relational trauma. So it really interested me. And I had this like another message, I'll say, not hearing voices, but I do get messages. It's like the moments that made me, the moments that made me. And that was just like this, I can talk about my moments, and these moments that are significant, the good ones and the bad ones, not just the good ones, right? And so I started collecting moments. And then this book evolved in this way that was, when you're at my age, you have a lot of moments. They accumulate. So it was so fun to write non-technical. Like I really enjoyed not needing footnotes and references. And this was about my story.
I mean, it reads so seamlessly. Like it just seems like this, you are a really natural storyteller and you take us right into those moments as you describe them. You really do. So you were mentioning already that your work really brings together neuroscience and internal family systems. You are one of the preeminent teachers of internal family systems, particularly. For listeners who may not know that term IFS, can you just get us a little oriented to the world of internal family systems and what caught your attention about it? Like why you were like, oh yeah, this orientation, this approach really makes sense to me.
So I've been working with Bessel van der Kolk, for people who know him, the Body Keeps a Score author, since 1992. So my whole career has kind of been steeped in trauma. He invited Dick Schwartz, who's the founder of IFS, to one of Bessel's kind of annual trauma conferences. And I went to a workshop of Dick Schwartz and I was like, what is this internal? Like, I'm not a family therapist. What's IFS, right? I went to this workshop and it was kind of a game changer for me. Dick Schwartz talked about IFS as this: we all have different parts or aspects of our personality. It's normal. It's not pathological. Because in school, I learned parts were pathology, right? That's what we learned. So Dick had this like, parts are not pathological, they're normal. So that intrigued me. The other thing he said, which really was my kind of Oprah aha moment, honestly, was we can take parts out of the past who have been traumatized, bring them into the present, and have them release what they're carrying. And I had never heard that before. The IFS term for that is unburdening, but this idea of releasing what we're carrying, getting out of the past and into the present, that was the moment I was hooked. And I do what I do, and I dove in, I took every training, I took every course, I got to know Dick Schwartz. And at some point he said, Frank, will you write the trauma curriculum for IFS? And I said, sure. So I put these two worlds of IFS and my education, my understanding of trauma together and created the curriculum. So it really is this: we all have parts that protect us. We all have parts that carry pain and trauma. And there is a way, we all have self energy, this kind of inherent wisdom in everyone. And there's a way to heal our trauma.
I think it's my favorite part of the IFS model, and the work that you do and the way that you teach is that belief, like that health premise about the self, the capital S self that is always there. It is buried under or crowded out by pain and trauma and memory and coping mechanisms, but it is always there. There's something so hopeful about that.
Right? Trauma blocks our love connection. Trauma blocks self, right? It blocks it. It doesn't mean we have to cultivate it. It means it's in everyone. Let's access it, right? It's more about accessing because trauma blocks it. Not many trauma survivors say, I have no self. I am broken. I'm defective. And I was like, well, we can agree to disagree. I know, like, I know you have that in you. And maybe if you're open, I can help you access it and find it because it's in there.
Yeah.
I could feel it.
Yeah. That is perhaps why you being willing to share your story in the ways that you do is that important, because your trauma history is extensive and complex. You went through a lot, you saw a lot, you experienced a lot. And so your journey, it's different, I think, as therapists from telling the story of a client that you helped. There's a courage around you offering your own journey as a modeling of that.
What I was surprised about, and I didn't expect this, Alexandra, was like telling my story. It became clear to me that it wasn't only about my story of being harmed or betrayed. It also was about me harming and betraying. I got really clear, like, if we're going to truly heal trauma, we have to acknowledge the ways we've been harmed, the ways we've been hurt, and the ways we've harmed and hurt others, like including ourselves. So I wasn't expecting that. I'm very forthcoming in the ways I internalized that energy and I enacted it in my relationships, right? And so that was a powerful, I didn't want it to be another trauma story like poor Frank. It was like, this is complicated. Poor Frank, and we all internalize that energy and we enact it on ourselves and on others. And how do we come to terms with that?
Frank, can you give us an example of that, of a way in which there's a connection between the way in which you were victimized and the way that then you were in ways a perpetrator as well? Can you just kind of put some detail on that for us?
The good news and the bad news is I've had several examples to share with
Where
you.
would you
right?
like to begin?
Yes, exactly right. I mean, the one that is the most, I mean, it certainly happened with my kids. It's very common for people. Like, it's like, oh my goodness, like I'm going to have children and I'm going to just love them and I'm going to do everything different from what my parents did so that I can have this corrective experience with them. And that was mortifying. That was mortifying for me when I started becoming my father to my children. Like that's, Alexandra, like that's when I was suicidal in my life.
hmm
I was like, I would rather kill myself than perpetuate this trauma on my children. Right. Like, so that was so painful to hear. I didn't do it to the same degree, but it didn't matter. I knew appropriate. I taught appropriate for a living. I helped people not do it. And to have me do it, the very thing I was an expert in without having control over it was so painful for me. You know, it's like that was my biggest growth in my life, honestly, was to have that. And we'll talk about this later, but like to not have contact with my parents for 7 years because of their inability to acknowledge what happened to me, but to also have my father inside of me and reenact some of the verbal abuse that he perpetuated on me with my boys was mortifying for me. So that was one. The other example was with my ex-wife. You know, I did the right thing and I married a woman like I was supposed to, you know, and she was passive and accommodating. Like we attract what we need to heal, right? We attract what we need to heal. And she was passive and accommodating like my mom. And I was controlling and angry like my dad. And so I reenacted my parents' situation as I like picked a partner to do everything differently in my conscious mind. Do you know what I mean? So those were two very like humbling experiences for me to kind of become my father with my then wife and to become my father with my kids. And, you know, as if I'll just say one more while we're here, if that's okay, is as if that wasn't enough. It's like, okay, when I came out after I kind of divorced my wife and came out as gay, I met this man who was controlling, just like my father, and I became passive like my mother. So I like tried it all
Yep.
out. I was
All the
like, I
stances.
went everywhere, all the places I did, and I was like, I'm running out of options here. Like, you know, so it was very painful and humbling. And this was part of this. I wanted to tell that kind of story, the complexity of all of us, to help people not feel so bad about the ways we are really compelled to repeat in the service of an attempt at healing.
That's right. So for somebody who's listening who is like, shoot, okay, so if Frank, with all of his knowledge and all of his, if he repeated it, where is the hope or where is the reckoning or where is the possibility? So yeah, tell us a bit about that.
Well, that's the piece that in it, the hope is, and like I had a pretty significant trauma history. I had all the knowledge in the world. I was a Harvard trained psychiatrist. Like, hello, like, and it's not about knowledge. It's really about the healing process that I believe, regardless of how serious, and I really do believe this, how extensive your trauma history is, healing is possible for everyone. That is why that's what the memoir is about. And I do map out the healing process that's informed with from neuroscience, that's informed from IFS and all the other models of therapy that I've trained in EMDR, sensory motor psychotherapy, is that we all can heal. There's a way that, and what I'm trying to do, Alexandra, is like turn all this therapy technical stuff into user friendly language for the general public. Like, I want to distill it. Like, we can heal, and there is a witnessing or a sharing that needs to happen. So, the part of us that holds the experience needs to share it because it's the holder of the information, whether it shares it with a therapist or a loved one or a dear friend. It needs to not be the only one with not just the story, the experience, the thoughts, the feelings and the physical sensations, right? The somatic, the emotional. So some people just get, I'll tell the story and I can heal. And I'm like, no, the experience needs to be shared, not relived, but shared, because reliving reinforces. So the first piece is finding a safe way to share the experience. The second piece for me is a corrective experience. The part holds trauma and it needs a corrective experience. So, can I be loved? Can I be seen? Can I be heard? Can I be validated? Can I not be ignored? Right? Can I be significant? So, a corrective experience is a necessary piece. And neuroscience talks about it as a mismatch or a disconfirming of the trauma. See, I'm bad, I'm wrong, like shame. I'm bad, I'm wrong, it's my fault. So after we've shared it, we need to have a corrective experience, which is the contrast to the trauma. And then once those two things happen, release is possible. That's where the release can happen. It's like, I don't need to carry this anymore because I'm not the only one who holds it. And I've gotten what I needed. I've gotten what I needed in this corrective experience. So there's a lot of different ways to do that. But for me right now, those are some key components to the healing process that I want people to understand it's possible.
I want to add two pieces and you tell me if these land for you because I started doing therapy when I was probably 21 or 22. I grew up in a really, really, really troubled, complicated family system. And my number one goal of therapy in my 20s was I don't want to do to my kids what was done to me. Like that was, I didn't even have kids. I wouldn't have kids for years. And there are ways in which I did. My kids experienced in their experience of having me as a mom, they experienced some of the things so despite all of my dedication to that idea. And so I have two thoughts. One is we can't go faster than our field. You and Bessel and Dick Schwartz, you know what I mean? And Janina Fisher and all of the incredible trauma teachers. This field the field of therapy is old, but the field of therapy was a lot of talking balloony heads for a very long time of tell your story, right? So really we're still in generation one, I think, of actual trauma healing that honors body, emotion, cognition. So there's a way in which you couldn't go faster than I couldn't go faster than our field was going.
I love what you're saying so much because I 100% agree with you, Alexandra. And one of the things I talked about at the networker when I did a keynote there was thank you, model makers. Thank you, thank you, thank you. You have brought this field forward. Pat Ogden, Bessel van der Kolk, Dick Schwartz, all these people who created these, Francine Shapiro, all of these people who created these models, like we are here because of you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And I love this. We can only go as far as we can go, right? As the field is taking us. Gabor Mate also saying, I believe the next phase here, and I feel like this is part of my mission in bringing trauma healing to the world, is now integration. It's time to integrate them. We can't silo the models. We needed them and we have to put them together because everybody needs something different. And integration for me is the next wave. That's why I started the Trauma Institute, which is synthesizing the trauma treatments and integrating them and bringing them to the next generation of healers. So I agree with you. And I'm not the only one that's going to do it. I think we all need to do it together for sure. But I do hold putting these brilliant models together is the next phase.
Okay. So for the therapists who are listening, you're nerding out on that. You get it. For the non-therapists who are listening, what that means for you is do some EMDR, then do some somatic work, then, do some IFS, like that you as a consumer of therapy, you get to kind of go where you can find a clinician that works within your schedule, your geography, your insurance. Each of these models has something, but it doesn't mean that if you're not clicking with one approach, you're done. You can't heal your trauma. There are other approaches to take, or there are clinicians who are going to say to you, I bring together sensory motor with IFS and da da da. So there are integrative practitioners.
100%.
Yeah.
And you know what I would say? Another thing, I love that you're educating listeners on how do I navigate here. I love that, right? And it's kind of like, what do you feel like you're holding a lot in your body? Like, start with a body person. Are your memories like I'm bad, I'm wrong, I'm no good, I have a really strong critic? Then go with EMDRs first, right? Are you feeling fragmented and all over the place? Go for IFS, right? And so as you start turning inward with some self awareness, where are you stuck to start? Go there. And different people will need different things at different phases of their healing journey.
That's great. Okay. And remembering that what the research has shown us is the technique matters, but the relationship matters too. So you, as a consumer of therapy, you also need to feel like you are working with somebody where you can have, because the corrective emotional experience that Frank was talking about before, of that moment when you are witnessed in a way you weren't before, that is sort of trans theoretical. You can have that experience with an IFS clinician. You can have that experience with a dialectical behavior therapy clinician. So your therapist is going to be a really big ingredient in your healing as well. Okay, so the other point I wanted to make too around, we can do really good work at time one around our trauma, but then we can't be done because there are parts of our trauma that we won't get to until we are a parent, or until we are sharing a life with a lover, until we are. So there's part of that too, right? Is that there's that relationality, that we can do a really good job in therapy before becoming a parent and still need to rework and revisit and refine. And what you modeled for us when you were talking about your journey with your boys was the difference between you and your dad was you went, uh-oh, shit. I've got something that's getting activated in me. You took responsibility for the ways in which you were becoming that which you had promised you wouldn't become. That's the difference.
Yeah, I'll say two things about that. I totally agree with you on that front too. And I used to think so. One is I was in therapy I was in therapy as a kid, which was the wrong kind of therapy. It was, a form of conversion therapy. I got so activated during my residency. I was in a big round of therapy for a long time that allowed me to acknowledge my trauma and to start processing it to the point that I was able to get into a good intimate relationship. Like after I reenacted both sides, I found my husband and I was like, all right, so that second round of therapy enabled me to find intimacy with another adult human, right? And so that's what I accomplished during that second round of therapy, right? And it wasn't until we had kids 5 years later that other layer showed up so intensely, right? So yes, we're going to get reactivated during our different phases and stages of our life. So that's one thing for sure. Nobody's ever done, in my view, right? And here's another thing that surprised me, but I hold it true. I used to think permanent healing was possible. I don't believe that anymore. Like, I don't believe that, right? I don't believe that because even like recently, I had this interaction with this kind of Hollywood type, and I was nervous about the meeting, and I totally lost my center. And I felt less than and inadequate, and I started proving myself. I saw myself do it. I was like, Frank, what are you doing? Like, why do you need to do this? You don't need to do this anymore. But it was an old wound that came back, and here I am, right? And so I feel like each time it shows up, and it will show up, it's not like, oh, that one's gone, check it off the box, right? Check it off the list. It's like a different layer, a different dimension. We learn something each time it gets reactivated. It's not as intense. We recover much more quickly. There is progress. It's not that it's just rinse and repeat. It's like I saw it while it was happening. I recovered quickly. And then I actually had this really important conversation with my mom the following week. And I saw myself get off center again. And I'm like, no, I'm here. I learned from last week. You know what I mean? So there's an evolution in the healing that I think it's important for us to just acknowledge as truth. Like it's okay to never be done, but to keep evolving the layers of healing in your trauma.
Yeah. I find that what's really helpful for me is just I think that I have a little bit more humor because
Yes.
I
Yeah.
catch myself doing I'm
Yes.
like,
There you
oh,
are.
well, look at me do it, like just a little bit of
Yeah.
levity, a little bit of, I'll put my hand on my
Yes.
heart,
Yes.
like just a little
That's right.
compassion, a levity, a gentleness about like, of course, right. Rather than, uh-oh, why is this happening? What does this mean? I've done it wrong. That I'm broken. This proves my brokenness.
That's right. Yeah.
You had mentioned your relationship with your father and moving in and out of relationship with him. So before we go to our listener question, I want to make sure that we talk a bit about that. You've had some different phases and cycles. And so I would love for you to talk a bit about how you knew when estrangement was the choice that you had to make, and then how you knew you could step back in some way, shape, or form.
I just get emotional when you even just ask the question. Like it just brings up the complexity and the place that I am so grateful that I was able to get to in relationship to my father. Right. So I just like just saying it, I was like, oh, I just feel it. I really do. And, it was when I started that second round of therapy that I talked about that I was, with a woman and then came out and found my husband. I started discovering what I had suppressed for so many years as a child. And when my trauma history started coming to the surface for me, I tried to be in relationship with my parents around it. I would call home. I was living in Boston. They were in Chicago. And I was like, this happened to me. And I remembered this thing. And is this true? And yeah, I was kind of trying to stay in connection with them. And they were at a place in their life that they couldn't acknowledge, and my mom couldn't acknowledge what my dad did. And my dad had they erased it for their own reasons, right? This didn't happen. This isn't true. Move on. What's your problem? They just kept shutting me down, shutting me down, shutting me down. And Alexandra, I wasn't strong enough then to hold my own. I wasn't. I couldn't hold, I kept losing myself over and over again every time I talked to them. So I had made this decision like, I need to set a boundary. Like any trauma healing includes some development of boundaries because relational trauma is a boundary violation. So part of the healing process is setting a boundary. So I established a boundary and I said, I can't talk to you guys right now because every time I try to talk to you, you shut me down and I feel bad about myself and I'm not strong enough. Did I think it would last 7 years? No way. It lasted 7 years of no contact, right? I realized what ended up happening was through that 7 years, I grew stronger and more confident. I knew what happened to me. Nobody could tell me anything anymore. You could say whatever you want, but I gained confidence in myself, in my history, and the point where my husband and I decided to have children, interestingly enough, was all right, I think I'm ready. I'm strong enough and I've always wanted a family. My whole life I wanted a family, right? And so that was I think it was my dad's 60th birthday party. My brother had told me I was in contact with my brother and sisters through that whole time. He's like, yeah, mom's throwing a 60th birthday party for dad. And I'm like, I'm going. I'm going to go. And I didn't say it in a mean way. I'm like, I told my mom because it was a surprise party for my dad. I'm like, I'm coming and I'd like you to meet at the time, my new boyfriend, Michael. They had never met, they didn't even know me as an out person in reality. So I was strong enough to re enter and I didn't lose myself. And I was able to hold me in the midst of, I didn't care what they said or what they didn't say. Interestingly enough, that silence and that boundary was painful for them, but also incredibly helpful because they knew they didn't have control over me. They knew that I was my own person. It created a differentiation and they wanted me in their lives. So they're like, okay, we're going to accept you for who you are. And so it was mutually beneficial. Only in retrospect, I could say this, right? That I needed it and they needed it because they learned something. So we started reconnecting in a tentative way. A lot had changed over those 7 years, but they wanted me in their lives and I wanted them in my life, So I was able to make that decision at that point and manage it.
I really, really, really appreciate you talking us through and giving us a window into your process. And what strikes me, what I imagine is striking listeners as well, is that it was not about, I can't until you guys do this differently. It was, I can't until I know I can be different. That's what I really hear you saying. It wasn't, you were not asking anything of them. You were not making demands of them. You took yourself out and you said, okay, well, I can go back in now because I know that I won't lose myself or question myself. And surprise, surprise, in the process, they had made some shifts that you weren't in charge of those shifts. You were not orchestrating those shifts, but they, thank goodness, they had done some of their own self-reflection and they knew they would have to show up differently.
And I didn't need them to change. It was a bonus. It was bonus. Do you know what I mean? It was like, oh, I don't need this anymore. I'm good with myself and I know what I am. But it was just a bonus. And it did show me, I didn't know it at the time. It was like, oh, they're not who they were when I was a child either. Like they are capable of change and growth too. I didn't know that before. So it was this like they're capable because at the end, like fast forward to the end of my dad's life, he was this failing old man who was like skin and bones. And I would go home to take care of him and help my mom, my sisters care for him. And I saw this feeble old man and I started feeling compassion for him for the first time in my life. I was like, this is not the same person who was a monster of my childhood. So I was able to even take it one step further. This is where I use the F word, forgiveness came in for me because people are very polarized around that word, forgiveness. And I think it's a choice. I don't think people have to forgive to heal. I don't feel that way at all. I experienced it in a way that was shocking for me because I was able, once I healed my own trauma and I felt good about myself, healed what I was carrying about what happened to me, then I was able to focus on the relational component with the person who harmed me. They're two separate processes in my learning now. Right? Let me heal my trauma. I could do that independent of you. I don't need you to heal my own trauma. But I'm choosing to work on the relational piece of the person who harmed me. And it was surprising. I did not expect that. I was able to let go of what I was holding about my father, not needing from him, I'm sorry.
Right. Your healing wasn't predicated on anything that would come from him or
No,
not come from him
that's right.
and nor was your healing predicated upon whether or not you could forgive him. You were able to forgive him, but that wasn't the key to your healing. That was just sort of like, oh, interesting. I am healing and I am forgiving.
Yeah, it was a shock because I didn't know. We're not, people don't write about this in trauma heal. Like we don't have the forgiveness model of trauma healing by Bessel van der Kolk. You know what I mean? Like and that's another new dimension of healing that I'm talking about now. It's like a whole different piece, which I was surprised by. I learned it by writing the memoir. Because I was writing this memoir in real time in the last 4 chapters because it was when he was failing. So I was writing it while it was happening, which was amazing to have that experience, right? And I ended up, well, this is in the book and I don't want to give it away, but I ended up being able to feel love for and from him, which I never thought was possible. So that was a shock in and of itself. But adding another layer of like, holy crap, it's like I started forgiving myself. That's when I was able to say, he's complicated and so are you. And you can forgive him and you can forgive yourself. And so I didn't expect that either. Like it was seeing the humanity in him enabled me to see the humanity in me too. Because I was very hard on myself for everything I did. I was so critical, right? And I stopped. I got that benefit that I didn't expect was the forgiving him helped me also forgive me.
Thank you for using your pain, like it just, you didn't have to, and you did, and you have, and, we all are better for the opportunity to learn alongside you. So thank you for doing that.
Oh, thank you so much. That means a lot to me. Thank you.
Before I let you go, can we speak to one of our listeners?
Absolutely.
Okay. So we've got Victoria, and she is calling in from Melbourne, Australia. She uses she, her pronouns. Let's take a listen.
Alexandra, I am currently in a dynamic with someone who makes me behave in a way that I only ever behave with my mother. It started off romantic and then quickly turned into friendship with romantic undertones. I don't know. I'm so confused. But we just can't leave each other alone. And he reminds me of my mother so much, the parent that I have the most amount of trouble with. What do I do? What is going on? And is this healthy? What's your advice?
So she's not going to like me to say this, but I'm like, Victoria, you are so lucky. You are so fortunate that this is happening right now for you. Like, that's probably the last thing she would want me to say. But it's true. Like, that is the opportunity. That is the true opportunity because we do unconsciously seek redemption from our wounding. I believe that is what attraction is. I believe attraction is our unconscious redemption for our wounding. So, yeah, you're going to attract someone who's like your most complicated relationship in your childhood. And you think you're attracting someone totally opposite, but we're not. It's unconscious. So, I don't think we do this deliberately to kind of create harm for ourselves. We don't do that, right? We're drawn to people that are familiar. Oh, I know this, but we have this view like this is a better model. This is going to help me heal that. But what we end up doing is repeating, right? So that's why I say, Victoria, this is an opportunity for you to, what we say in IFS is do the U turn. Why am I attracting this? What in me needs to be healed? And instead of trying to get it from him, can I provide it for myself? This was the thing that was so striking for me. As I said earlier in our conversation, I tried to, you know, heal my mother's relationship and I became my father. I tried to heal my father's relationship and I became my mother, right? I did the repeat. I did the repeat. And it wasn't until I healed enough of my own trauma that I stopped seeking redemption in my attraction. Because when I saw my husband, like, I don't know this. This is totally foreign for me. Like, this is not activating that spark of desire, but really redemption. Like, it was different. It was new territory. And it ended up being healthy and not wound driven because I had done enough of my own work at that point. So take advantage of it and learn and grow.
Right. Right. For you and Mike, you were at a place in your journey where you could be attracted to him and build something with him that was not redemptive. So for Victoria, she's like, hey, you guys, this is feeling a little bit like it's woundy. But I also think that what you're saying here is she can transform and grow and heal in the context of this relationship.
Yes. Yes. So this is, I love that you're saying that because some people think, they're like, Frank, are you saying I have to be single for 10 years to heal my trauma? I'm like, no, I'm not saying that because I learned so much from my current husband about being alone in the context of a connection. He's an introvert, and he taught me. I learned how to heal my attachment wounding in the context of a relationship, but you have to be conscious and you have to not. So be conscious of it and don't expect the other person to heal it for you. You can heal your own in the context of a connection when you're conscious. So it can be done in the context of a relationship, but not when you're expecting them to fix it for you.
Well, and that's what I think that Victoria, what I hear in your question is a level you feel pretty overwhelmed by this, right? She's saying he makes me do things that I only so she's speaking to a kind of powerlessness. So what I want to be like whispering in Victoria's ear is he is not your mother and you are not his little girl. So you have a chance in this relationship, right? So there were things when you were little in the relationship with your mom, there were things you actually could not do. And there were things that you could not say because it would not have been safe and you were not big enough and strong enough. But guess what? Now, Victoria, you are a whole grown ass woman. And so you don't have to, right? Even if he is if it feels very much like there's a scenario where you are at risk of losing yourself or falling back in, that's the moment where you get to say, okay, I don't have to do now what I had to do then. And so now what else is possible? Like, what could you say that you couldn't say then? Or what could you do now that you couldn't do then? Right. So she feels the pull, but I think we want to remind her that she's not powerless to the pull.
And is she committed to taking care of that little girl? Is she committed to taking care of that little girl, not blaming him or expecting him to? So, that's the thing. She can make different decisions now because I love it, grown ass woman, right? You can make different decisions in the relationship as a grown ass woman to do that. And in order to do that effectively, you need to commit to that little girl so that you take care of her instead of farming her out to someone else.
Yeah. Yeah. And we don't know, if he had written in to us, he might have an entire story of who she becomes to him. And so I think we both would be huge cheerleaders for like, okay, so get a couples therapist involved, right? Because then, and it also she might feel a bit liberated from this dynamic if and as she understands who she becomes to him, and then they can see that like mutual activation. So then she can tap into perhaps a kind of care and concern for him and the little boy that he brings into their dynamic.
Right. What ends up happening most time that people are not aware of this is that on the surface, it looks like opposites attract. He's an extrovert. I'm an introvert. He's a this, I'm a that. But in fact, we have similar wounding on the inside. So he's got his own, who knows what it is, right? He has his own story because he's drawn to her for probably somewhat similar reasons that she's drawn to him about their history. And if they commit to healing their own together, that's a game changer.
Yep.
It's a game changer for both of them.
Yeah. Healing their own together. Yeah. Beautiful. Okay. This has been entirely too much fun. I really have so enjoyed
Same.
this conversation.
Same. Yes.
Oh,
Thank you so much.
thank
Yes.
you.
Feel the same way.
So we will, of course, link in the show notes To Be Loved, a story of truth, trauma, and transformation. So that, you all, that is going to be in the show notes for you. It's available wherever books are sold. But what else? What are some other ways that folks can get to know you and the good work that you're doing?
Yeah. So certainly go to my website. I've just got a brand new website with all the things that are going on. So I'm super excited about that. FrankAndersonMD.com. So people can learn about all the stuff that I'm doing there. And I've linked two new companies that have started in the midst of bringing trauma healing to the world. And one of them I referenced earlier is called Trauma Institute. So it's traumainstitute.com. And that is a place for therapists as well as the general public to learn about trauma healing and to learn about integrating trauma treatment. So that's a brand new organization that I started. And then another organization is called Trauma Informed Media. So it's trauma-informedmedia.com. And that's the work I'm doing in LA here, is bringing trauma content to Hollywood in twofold. One is there's so much inauthentic and inaccurate content that's being put out that people are consuming. So we're trying to have influence so that it's more accurate and authentic portrayals of trauma so that people can get educated through media, which is a huge way to educate, right? And the second is to help de-traumatize Hollywood because there's so much trauma that happens here, whether you're playing a role that is a traumatized character and how to do that in a safe way, or there's this hierarchy. We know about all the Me Too movements and all the corruption that has happened here. And so we're trying to bring trauma-informed content to studios, to organizations, to corporations here too. So we're building curriculum that can be instituted within the studio. So a lot of exciting things, all in the same purpose of helping people heal from trauma.
Wonderful. Wonderful. You are such a guiding light in this arena. And I'm so glad that you are doing that. And I'm so glad that you and your husband have got the support that you need, right? So that you can expand and do all of this wonderful stuff while also just making sure that you are getting rest and care because
That's
this
right.
is a lot. This is a lot.
It's a
I'm
lot.
so excited. Okay. Well, I'm going to keep cheering for you and
Beautiful.
supporting you in all of the ways. So thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you.
And thank you for all that you're doing because we have our similarly complicated histories. And I hear and see and feel all that you're doing too, to do the same thing. So thank you for showing up in the ways that you do too.
Thank you, Dr. Frank, for joining me here on Reimagining Love. You can find a link to Dr. Frank's new book, To Be Loved, a story of truth, trauma, and transformation in the show notes. And thank you, Victoria, for sharing that very thoughtful question. If you want to submit a written or audio question to the show, visit the link in the show notes. I would love to hear from you. Thank you for listening to Reimagining Love. I'll see you back here next week. Until next time, be well. Do you have a relationship question that you want answered on the show? Visit reimagininglove.com to send in a written or audio question. Questions can be about intimate partnerships, family relationships, friendships, you name it. If you're looking for more love and relationship content, you can find me on Instagram at dr.alexandra.solomon or visit my website, dralexandrasolomon.com, where you'll find my blog as well as the Intimate Relationships 101 e-course based off of the popular class I teach at Northwestern University. Thank you for listening and see you next week here on Reimagining Love.